Good morning and welcome back to Talking Planning. So today, what I wanted to do was just cover off on a couple of important things regarding my last two Saturday videos. And they were my flight review flying up to Bundaberg and the review of the Tilt train coming back. So this episode is what I like to call the Transport Showdown. So all we're going to do is we're just going to compare the two modes of transport, flying and taking the train, and using 5 criteria that I've created, and I'll go through in just a minute, seeing which one is actually better and which one I believe delivers a better experience. And thus, I'd personally probably choose. Although, I did enjoy both, I must say. It's a very, very tight contest, so let's crack on with it. Alright, so I've broken down my experience into 5 categories, and that is the passenger experience, the onboard service, practicality of the service, the cost of the trip plus any extras, and the ease of booking and paying for that journey. I'm not going to count journey time, but I'll just pop that in now, and I'll say that the flight from takeoff to landing in Bundaberg was 37 minutes, and the train from getting on board to stopping in Roma Street was 4 hours and 45 minutes. There's a big difference there, but by the time you factor in all the other things about getting around and transport, they start to balance out a bit more, although the flight is still quicker. So let's start with passenger experience. So the flight that I took was on board an Alliance Airways Fokker 70, and I flew in economy class from Brisbane to Bundaberg. The seating was typical early 90s airliner. So a basic economy seat, comfortable with decent legroom. Modern aircraft aren't quite so good, so that was a really good plus point and absolutely excellent for a 40-minute flight. You really can't doubt that the old Fokker 70s and 100s with those big plush seats are really comfortable for short journeys. And the flight was quite quiet, so I was actually moved to an exit row for no extra charge. So I had really good legroom. There was about 1.5 foot between my knees and the seat in front, so no complaints there. So I was sitting in an economy seat whilst on the ground. That was my assigned seat. And even so, the legroom in those was fantastic. You know, it was a lot better than a typical modern economy class aircraft. The window views are nice, especially taking off. You know, we took off on the new runway, which was really special, and I cherished that as well. Alliance kept their aircraft nice and clean and well maintained. So the interior is in good shape. The outside's really nice. There's no paint peeling or anything like that. The planes are in excellent condition, and the crew were friendly and helpful. So the passenger experience of flying with Alliance was very positive. So let's look at what it's like on the train. So on the Tilt train, I travelled in their business class product from Bundaberg to Brisbane. The seats are a very comfortable, large recliner style seat, trimmed in cloth. And it's fairly similar to a domestic business class seat on what you get on, say, a Virgin Australia or Qantas 737, which for a 4.5 hour train journey is reasonably comfortable. The interior is clean and well maintained. However, a few of the little extras in the product are a bit dated. For example, there's in-seat audio, and the TVs, particularly on the electric Tilt train, are a shared TV with no volume rather than a personal TV, which you get on the Spirit of Queensland. That being said, the crew are friendly and helpful, and the views out the window are really nice as well and are worth enjoying. So let's move on to the next category, onboard service and inclusions. So the flight offered complimentary water, but because of COVID restrictions, there was no buy on board menu. That being said, for a 40-minute flight, it's not an issue. I think you can wait till Bundaberg, or you can get something at the airport before you board. So I don't see that as a massive issue. It's a bit of a shame they've had to cancel the onboard menu and there was only a basic water service, but really for a flight of that length, it's not something to worry about. Included in the fare is also a single checked bag for 20 kilos and 7 kilos of carry-on. And that also varies, I should point out, with any frequent flyer status you have with Velocity, which is Virgin Australia's frequent flyer mile system. So I do have a higher status, so I was actually entitled to 2 23 kilo bags plus carry-on, but the average traveller travelling on red status Velocity or without any frequent flyer system should get a 20 kilo bag checked and a 7 kilo carry-on as standard. So let's compare it with the train. So on the train, travelling in business class, you get a complimentary orange juice on boarding. There's chilled drinking water available in the carriage vestibule, so you just bring your own cups or water bottle. There are actually small paper cups available. The other thing is there's a decent buy on board menu. There's lots of different choices. There's 3 hot meals, pies, sausage rolls, sandwiches, wraps, and snacks, as well as an extensive drink service, beer, wine, soft drink, tea and coffee. And I thought the prices were quite reasonable. I got a honey soy chicken, which was a dish sort of that size, and it was $9.50, which I think was quite good. And I got a beer later on in the trip, that was $6.50. I think those prices are fairly reasonable, so a good mark for Queensland Rail there, having a reasonably priced buy on board menu. In business class, you get 2 20 kilo checked bags, plus an allowance for carry-on of up to 20 kilos in business class. Now, because of how quiet the train was, it meant that I could carry all of my items as carry-on, including a decent-sized roller bag, a separate bag and a backpack, which was really good. It made it easy to keep everything by your seat, and that was really handy. So what about the practicality of that service? So flying, importantly, in some ways it's practical, in others it isn't. The journey is quick. You know, the flight is only 40 minutes or so. It's about an hour gate to gate, but you're only in the air for about 40 minutes. The journey is fast, but the problem with travelling by air is the airports have to be on the outskirts of town. You know, noise, space issues, airports take up a lot of room, so they're not in the middle of town, which means getting there can always be a challenge. The other thing is the departure from Brisbane is an early morning departure. There was an 8 a.m. flight, and that was it really. Then let's look at the train. So one of the big benefits of trains is train stations are generally in the centre of cities, which makes them really convenient to get to. And in Bundaberg, this is no exception. The train station is only a couple of 100 metres walk from the sort of the centre of town and all the retail precinct, which makes it really easy and convenient. And not only that, my hotel was only a 5-minute walk from the train station, so no problems getting to the train. So we come to one of the most important things, I think, and that is the experience of booking. And unfortunately, this one's really one-sided at the moment. So when I flew with Alliance, obviously I booked through Virgin Australia as it's a code share flight. It's a really simple online booking procedure. I just had to check in at the airport, and normally you don't, but that's required because Brisbane Airport is requiring all people to check in due to COVID restrictions so they can ask health questions. You just have and then you have your usual security on departure. So that's screening of your checked bags and screening of your carry-on, as well as a run through the metal detector and any personal screening if they believe that's necessary. The other simple thing, credit card payment online. You still have your credit card surcharge, but they're fairly minimal. They're standard rates. And flights earn Velocity points through the Velocity Frequent Flyer program. Now, the train, unfortunately, due to the COVID restrictions, this is where it really loses out. Queensland Rail has decided to cancel online bookings due to restrictions. So that means you've got to ring up and go over the phone and sit on hold until someone calls you back. And it can be cumbersome. I was lucky that I was all done and sorted in about 20 minutes, but I could imagine if there are a few people trying to travel, that could be a really long, drawn-out process. The other thing is there's no points or loyalty programs, and you have to pay by credit card over the phone. So you've got to read out the 16 numbers, the CVV, all the usual stuff. And yeah, it's okay, but it's a little bit more cumbersome compared to using a website. So that brings me to the final category, and that is the trip cost plus the extra costs on board and getting to your final destination. So the flight, I'll summarise that first. So my flight itself cost $109, but I don't always think that the cost of a flight really is a true representation because the journey to and from an airport can get quite expensive, because you've got to then consider a taxi or a ride share, a dedicated airport train, and then the other thing is if you decide to order any food at the airport. I was very fortunate that in Brisbane I actually got dropped off by family, and that saved me probably somewhere between $50 and $100 for a Uber or taxi ride. And at the other end in Bundaberg, I was able to walk to the nearest shopping centre, which is about 1.5 kilometres from the airport, and then get a bus into town from there. The other thing is if you want something to eat before your flight, you've got to pay airport food prices, and let's be honest, airport food by and large is quite expensive for poor quality, so you've got to deal with that. Now let's talk about the train. Now in business class, I paid $97.50 for the train, so just under $10 less than the flight. One of the benefits with travelling by train as well is that the stations are generally located right in the middle of town. They're near other transport hubs. They're near, hotels and a lot of convenient locations. And to get to a train station, generally the bus or other public transport options don't charge you any more. So compared to flying, sometimes on a flight you'll get food included. However, with the train, all the food is optional by on board. And I thought the $9.50 for the hot meal and $6.50 for a beer was quite reasonable. Now it's time for the verdict. And I should point out, I enjoyed both of these methods of travelling a lot. I was really, really excited to go flying again because I hadn't done it in basically 6 months. So I was really keen to get back up in the air. But on this occasion, I actually think for the novelty of it, given the fact that Australia isn't known for doing rail all that well, I'm actually going to have to award it to the train. I think the Tilt Train service, by and large, is quite good. I enjoyed the journey. I thought that compared to the flight, the experience, particularly in business class, compared really favourably. I thought that the 4-hour, 45-minute journey time isn't significantly longer than flying. It's maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours more. By the time you think about check-in, getting to the airport, security, I don't think the train is that much slower. So on this occasion, I'm going to have to give it to the train, especially because it's a really interesting way of travelling compared to what most Australians are used to. However, unfortunately, there's one thing I've got to point out in all of this. I've just shown you two potential ways of going to Bundaberg, and whilst I think they're both good options, and I really like the train in particular, I still think that the average person is going to use neither, because once you get to Bundaberg, the public transport network and the walkability of the city aren't there for enough people to make the decision to not bring their own car. And in that case, I think the average person going to Bundaberg is just going to, from Brisbane in particular, is just going to drive. It's a 4.5-hour drive, so the drive is about the same speed as the train. You've got a car for when you get there. And unfortunately, I think for most Queenslanders, that wins out. But I should say, in defence of the train and flying, if you're prepared to do a little bit of research, you're prepared to try local public transport, and you're prepared to walk like I did, you can have a really, really nice little trip without spending all that money on petrol and having a car. And I'd quite happily travel back up to Bundy without one. So I'd like to thank you for joining me on Talking Planning, and I'm hoping that this little Transport Showdown episode has given you some inspiration to look at travelling regionally in Queensland, as it's safe at the moment. Obviously follow all health advice when you travel. And to consider doing things a little bit differently and maybe leaving the car at home and trying public transport on as well as an innovative way to get up there by either the Tilt Train, which I think is a great service, or flying. Give both a shot, and I think what I wanted to do with this video is really highlight the fact that you don't just have to drive to all regional Queensland destinations, and that there is another way, particularly for a lot of the ones on the coast. So thanks for joining me. See you again soon, and consider taking the train next time you go to regional Queensland. Did you know on Talking Planning we release a brand new video every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time? Make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell to make sure that you're always up to date with the latest Talking Planning content. If you aren't already, you can also follow my adventures on Twitter and Instagram, both with the handle Talking Planning.